Let's go. We're back again. This time we are set sailing in the Titanic. Me and Rowan have booked our first class rooms. I'm in the lounge and he's currently in his room. So,
I'm not in
setting
my room.
sail.
No, I'm in the lounge. You're in the dining room.
Oh, yes, I'm in
Lover's
the
naked.
dining room. But yeah, we're set sailing from Southampton to New York. Hopefully, history doesn't repeat itself. Speaking about history, let's talk about the theories surrounding the real Titanic crash. So, I think the first one is
Crash.
crash.
What? We're gonna crash. What are you on about?
Yeah,
Bro,
yeah,
I've spent 807 quid on this ticket to get on first class, and you're telling me this is gonna crash?
yes, you know.
Get me out of here!
I mean, obviously, it seems like one person knew about that the boat was going to crash, according to theory. So let's dive straight into the man himself, J.P. Morgan. So, Rowan, what have you looked at in terms of what this man, why he decided to not enter the boat? Did he know that he was going to crash?
Possibly. I'm not accusing him of anything. However, there's a lot of speculation around the fact that he was very much adamant that he wanted to create the Federal Bank Reserve at that time, and there was namely a lot of competitors surrounding him at the time who he wasn't very fond of because they didn't want him to start the Federal Reserve. And it's a bit coincidental that J.P. Morgan decided not to board the ship a few days before, and namely, so the main three people who were opposed to starting the Federal Bank Reserve were three of the richest men in the world. So you've got Benjamin Guggenheim, you've got Isidor Straus, who was actually the head of the Macy's department store, and John Jacob Astor, who was actually the wealthiest man in the world at the time. And all three of them were promised a luxurious trip on the Titanic, the RMS Titanic, to New York. And all of a sudden, their lives came to an end, a bitterly cold end, because Rose wouldn't let them on the wood she was sitting on, which is a bit rude because there was definitely enough room there. Like they definitely could have fit on with her, and then we wouldn't have had the Federal Bank Reserve currently. And yeah, it's just a weird coincidence, a weird coinkydink that them three happened to meet their demise a few days later, and yeah, there was no room for opposition because if you take out the three most wealthy men in the country at the time and the largest amount of competition, then it's an easy way because you haven't got much resistance against your ideas or anything like that. So yeah, and then we have the Federal Bank Reserve, which basically means that the United States of America became what it is today. It became more or less a business, and it actually has its own business ID number, which I did not realize. The business ID number of the United States is 28 USC 3002 15, which is very interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's just speculation. But I'm not accusing the man of anything, but it just seems a bit suspicious. But you know.
Yeah, for sure, because that's a big topic within the conspiracy theory fields that J.P. Morgan knew of the event, but let's be honest, me myself, I'm not completely sure. Like you said, it's all speculation. My personal thoughts on the Federal Reserve situation is that it is perhaps the leading of a reset, a financial reset, especially because if you look back at the US, there was some financial situations back in 1906. So by potentially the wealthiest men dying in the boat, it could perhaps led to the Federal Reserve created. It may have just been created regardless of if the men died or not. But again, I don't know. It's tough to say. But I think the financial implications back then would have caused the Federal Reserve to be created regardless of the men dying.
Yeah, I completely agree. I agree with what you're saying, that it was sort of a financial reset. I don't think necessarily the Titanic sinking was the reason it started. However, I feel like it was a nifty little operation to shift some people out of the picture and
For sure.
make it look like it wasn't an accident or anything like that. It's a good excuse to sort of just get rid of them and bury the evidence. Because if there's less opposition in the way, then it's easy to just start something. And that's basically the beast system that we have today. It has been started from something such as the Titanic's. It's just one building block, I think, of many that led us to be in this position today where we have the current conventional banking systems.
Yeah, for sure. And through that, you have maritime law, which is something, maritime law. So for me, that could lead, that perhaps is the origin of the sinking of the Titanic, maritime law. I don't necessarily know too much about it, unless you do, Rowan, you can continue with that. But I think that being connected to the Titanic sinking, I think is very, very suspicious indeed.
Yeah. Well, I'm not 100% clued up on what I know maritime law is essentially the law of the sea and law that governs the sea. So yeah, I can see potentially what you're saying in terms of it could have been another building block to sort of reaffirm and keep creating this beast system that we live in today, where everything's ruled and governed. And it's like it's essentially a false flag to create more and more security over time, and it leads to the systems we have today. It's little things occurring that gives those in charge a reason and a scapegoat to be able to impose different laws upon people. And over time, that builds up, it compounds, and it means over time that laws and rules become more and more restricted. So yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I didn't even realize that those two were connected, but now you've said it, that does make total sense, to be honest.
Yeah, thanks for that. And another theory that appears within the Titanic field is the fact that it wasn't actually the Titanic that sank, according to Robin Gardiner. It was its sister ship, the Olympic. Now, they say it's based on some insurance fraud, again, more speculation. But this was because initially the Olympic was already damaged back when it sailed from Southampton to New York again back in 1911. So, because of some insurance fraud, he believes that the Olympic was crashed for some reason.
Yeah, I don't think it was necessarily insurance fraud. Like I think to a degree it probably was, but I think the theory speculates that yeah, they had this ship that was basically just on the brink of collapse, and they thought, what better way to get rid of it than to have it as this magnificent sort of ship that's supposed to go off, and then it crashes, and it's more plays a sympathy card. I feel like, because if you have something that's already broke down and worn off, I don't think necessarily that they intended to go into an iceberg. However, I think yeah, the theory stipulates that basically they had the Olympic, which had loads of crashes. I think it had a major crash with the ship called the HMS Hawk, and there was a massive buyout for that they had to ship off, and they lost a lot of time building the Titanic and a lot of parts because they had to repair a lot of the parts that they were planning to use for the Titanic for the Olympic, and it became more of a burden than it actually did any use, or it didn't actually serve the fleet anymore. So what they did was they basically flipped the two. Now there is some pictures that prove this, which I will bring up on screen very shortly after this final point. But essentially, yeah, the thought was that they wanted to get rid of it. So what they did is they sent it out and they'd flip the ships around, so the Olympic became the Titanic and vice versa. And yeah, it was one of those things where people wouldn't basically realize which ship was which, and it was so it just became a matter of the ship disappearing, and when they struck the iceberg after that, then people would be like, oh well, like that's just unfortunate. It seems like a series of unfortunate events that you'd accidentally go into an iceberg, instead of the ship's actually crumbling. It wouldn't make it past a few more years of life. However, the Olympic, I say in inverted commas, supposedly went on for a career after that of about 30 years. I think it finally got decommissioned in 1935 after a long serving career. It actually served in the First World War, and then it was it was basically an ocean liner for a while, and then it retired in 1935. So it lived on for a lot longer, even though it sustained a lot of damage prior to the event. So I think that's why a lot of people seem to think that there's some suspicion going on between whether the Titanic was actually the one that they said was the Olympic and vice versa. Also, the pictures, I actually found these on a Reddit post. I'm going to credit the person who posted them. It's called Bryce Mack. Sorry if I'm absolutely butchering that name there. But he has some pictures. I will send you these, Engombe, and I'll pull them up. So the first picture is a picture of the RMS Olympic whilst it's under construction. And if you look at the top of the picture, so there's a white line with some railing, and you can see the portholes at the top. And if you notice the pattern, it begins quite spread out. And then the further you go to the right, they become clustered, and you have this small cluster of about 5 portholes altogether. And then there's another picture of the Titanic under construction. And on those pictures, you can see that the portholes there are actually quite spread out. There's like a disparity between, like there's an equal length between the portholes, and you don't have this cluster. However, if you look at the picture when the Titanic was sent out on its maiden voyage, if you look at the portholes at the top, it actually looks like they are clustered to the right, exactly like the Olympic was. And the Olympic, after, had its portholes more spread out like the Titanic did when it was under construction. Now, obviously, that seems a bit suspicious. That why would they change the portholes mid construction, and wouldn't that be pretty difficult? So I think that's the most concrete piece of evidence suggesting that the Titanic and the Olympic were switched. They did an old switcheroo. But yeah, it's quite interesting. So White Star Line, who owned the company, the Titanic and the Olympic, they actually got a huge buyout of about £1 million, I think, at the time, which today's money is about 150 million. And that payment right there actually put one of the insurance company, who was, I think it was Lloyd's, what were they called now? Lloyd's Bank Company or something like that. I can't actually remember the specific name. It was Lloyd's of London. That's who it was. So they put out they had to give the White Star Line a buyout of 1 million. And today's money, that's 89 million, so almost 90 million, almost 100 million. And yeah, that put them out of business. So yeah, quite interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And just given the connections between the Titanic and Olympic, just goes back to Greek mythology with the Titans and the Olympians. I mean, it's quite symbolic, really, where the Titans fought the Olympians for 10 years in a war called Titan Recrumacy, I believe that's how you say it. And of course, it led to the Titans losing to the Olympians, and the Olympians are ruling the sky and the earth. And it's pretty interesting, like the Titans being imprisoned to Tartarus is perhaps again symbolic of the people that unfortunately passed away during the Titanic. Also, you mentioned how it was owned by White Star Line, who, of course, JP Morgan owns White Star Line too, which is pretty interesting in that regards. And the fact that as well, if you go back to its initial construction, it was constructed by the shipbuilders Harland and Wolff, and esoterically it's quite interesting because the Wolf links to Sirius, which is known as the Dog Star, and of course, as I said before, the Titanic being owned by the White Star. So
yeah, I was literally just thinking that. That's weird.
Yeah. So is it just the Star Sirius running it all? I mean, it could possibly be.
Potentially, yeah. It's weird how there was this connection, sort of symbolically, to like different events in mythology with the Olympians and the Titans. I think that's a very strange connection there. Like I said to you as well, we do actually plan on doing an episode on Nazi zombies, because Nazi zombies seems to have a lot of information. It seems very esoterically deep, and there's a lot of tie-ins to like the occult and stuff like that. But just on that note, so one of the most recent Call of Duty games, the Zombies installment, had the two of the first maps that came out on that game were Voyage of Despair, which was a a map set on the Titanic, and then the second one was 9, which was set in ancient Egypt and with the Olympians and stuff like that. So I think there is some sort of connection there. I think esoterically there is some meaning behind that. But it is very strange how these mythological stories all seem to have some sort of symbolic reference point to events that are happening today. Obviously it's metaphorical. It's not clear. It's not like a clear example of what's happening today. It's not like it's more of a, what's the word? Not an what's the word? Not a, I can't remember the word. Allegory. That's it. So it's more like an allegory of what is happening today rather than an actual like storyline. Sort of like the Bible, like how the Bible has all these references to different things, and if you break down the actual metaphorical meaning of it, it seems to play out a story that could be referenced today. And perhaps that's just how the code goes, and the code just repeats itself over and over again.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we know the saying that history repeats itself, and it also shows with the mythological collections that all of life is based off myth. It seems it's pretty surreal because they try to program you in saying that mythology is not real, and in a sense, it is all allegorical, but there's hidden truths within mythology, and we've mentioned it right here in this episode about the Titanic. It's all connected at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%. There's also quite a lot of things around this Titanic story that are a bit suspicious as to like why did it occur like that. So I don't know if you realise or if you know that first class was only 30% full. So a lot of people dropped out prior to the Titanic departing, which is suspicious in itself, because obviously the lower classes were at almost max capacity. I think third class was at max capacity, and then the other two. So maybe second class was at about 60, 70%, and then first class was at 30%. And prior to its departure from Southampton, a lot of people dropped out, which is a bit suspicious. It seems like something's going on there. Someone's just giving them a little hint. It's like the 9/11 story, isn't it? You always hear of celebrities and stuff. It was like, oh, I was supposed to be on the flight to 9/11. One day I slept in. I accidentally slept in too long. My alarm didn't go off, and then I missed my flight, and then it happened to be 9/11, and now I'm alive still. But it's like that, but for 100 years ago. It's a 100-year ago Titanic, which is, it's kind of strange. And also the fact that there was nowhere near enough lifeboats to help with people or anything like that. There's nothing they could do to save the people that died and met a bitterly end, which seemingly plays into the hand of the Olympic theory, where I assume that had less lifeboats, and that's why they didn't have the capacity to deal with anything like that. Also, I don't know if you know, so in the film, obviously, they depict it. So the captain of the ship was actually really virtuous, and he stood by the ship and he went down with the ship. That's actually not true. So the captain actually got off the ship and he lived. So that's how the captain of the RMS Titanic.
Yeah.
He got off the ship safely in real life. I mean, not in the James Cameron film, obviously.
Yeah.
For those of you that have seen it, it's a pretty good film. It's a pretty good film. I like the film.
Actually,
I don't think it's very harmful or anything like that. It's not great. It's not a masterful film, but it's watchable. It's definitely watchable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the way that Cameron used Leo DiCaprio as what's his name?
Jack,
yes, and Kate Winslet as Rose is very interesting. Make it seem romantic and all of that. Jack being in third class and Rose being in first class. The movie there is to represent the class boundaries that existed within that society at the time in the 100%. Early 20th century.
And it's very blue-pilled as well. No offense to DiCaprio. I mean, to be fair, DiCaprio probably could pull that off in real life. But
yeah,
I think for the most part, it sells people a dream. Like, if you're a third class, you're only spending what? How much did they spend? Let's say. So if you were in third class, you spent. Yeah. To be fair, that's still a lot of money. That's still a lot of money in today's money. So Jack would have spent £7 to get on the boat. relatively to today's money, that's about £852, which is actually still like relatively a decent amount of money. Like if you were going to a Beyonce concert or a Drake concert or something like that, you could probably expect to pay about that much price just for like a standing ticket. So it is a substantial amount of money. And then for first class, however, it was £105,883. So there's quite a class disparity there. So I don't know how true that, if that sort of scenario would actually happen in real life. I doubt it, because obviously like Kate Winslet, like I don't know. Maybe I'm just being pessimistic here, but I think there's quite a bit of a class disparity. Like Leonardo DiCaprio, I don't know if his looks can save that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, true. Very, very true. No. Yeah.
There's another detail as well I'd like to cover. I'm not sure if you're aware of this. So, in 1898, there was a novel written by a gentleman called Morgan Robertson called Futility.
Yes.
And it detailed an unsinkable ship sinking. And the ship in the book was named the Titan, which links in again with the Titans and the Olympians, like we've said about mythology. I'm not sure if he's tying it into mythology there. And in the story, in the book crashes into an iceberg. Now, is this a really old example of predictive programming, or is it just because it's in the code? And perhaps the machine elves have contacted Morgan Robertson and said to him, look, we need you to write a book about the Titan. It's going to crash in a few years, and we're working to get the message out there. See, this just plays into that idea of like predictive programming, and you know, when writers and directors and stuff like that are inspired to make work, and it also seems to reflect what's going to happen in the future. It's like we were saying about the AI and stuff like that. Perhaps people are coming to be visited by these machine elves, these AI, or whatever these beings are. Like, you remember I said about the guy who invented the computer? Not the computer, but it was something similar along those lines.
Yes.
And he said he was being visited by machine elves, and they were telling him to build it. So it's what I'm saying is, it's like they seemingly get this inspiration from somewhere elsewhere, but it's either that or they know what's going to happen, which I think I'm starting to believe that the former is more true. That because as a creative myself, and someone who has ideas and has written things and has like made sketches on my YouTube channel, it's one of those things where I think ideas just come to you, rather than I'm not like seeking out knowledge or anything like that. But it seems like the information comes from somewhere that is not of this earth, and it's not of this realm necessarily, like gets sent down to. It's like Adam was saying, I think he was saying along the same lines, where he says to have a code just spring to his head. And I think that's very true, and I think there is some truth to that. So yeah, on the note of the Titan, the book that Morgan Robertson wrote, it's very uncanny that it's so similar. Also in the story as well, the reason that a lot of people died was because of the lack of lifeboats. So yeah. Also, wow. I think it's also a fallacy that the Titanic was named the unsinkable ship. I think it was called unsinkable after it had already departed.
Yeah, that's what seems to be the case.
Yeah. So we're thinking, oh, like it'll be fine. It won't sink, and then it sunk, obviously. But yeah. So.
Yeah, that is crazy. So, predictive programming in the early 20th century. I mean, yeah, like you said, it's not really predictive programming. It's more, like you said, ideas spring into mind, and the ideas get manifested into reality by the supernatural. I think that's how it works, really. So, you know, many people say, like I've said before earlier, that the Titanic didn't sink or whatever. All these, what do you call it, speculation is very, it doesn't lead to anything at the end of the day. You know, it's all theories, because, you know, to do research on a boat event that happened 111 years ago, unless you were there, it's very hard to detail any theories that suggest another option based or another option that is different to the narrative that is given to us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, to a degree, it's kind of contentious whether it did actually hit an iceberg. I mean, we're only taking the word for it. And
Yeah,
back then, obviously, it didn't have the technology to assess whether it was actually hit by an iceberg. I'm not saying it wasn't. Obviously, it did crash. But I think if we were to entertain the idea that the two boats were switched and one was the Olympic and one was the Titanic, then it would make more sense that it'd be obvious to, like, looking at it. Obviously, it's still crashed in the Atlantic now. You can't retrieve it. It's still there. So it looks like it has sunk for a reason. But you don't know whether it just sunk because it sunk because it was damaged previously, like the Olympic was. Like, it's very difficult to actually ascertain whether it did hit an iceberg because we can't prove that. I mean, back in the day, obviously, there was no cameras. Well, there was cameras, but they weren't functioning the same way that they are today. And I doubt people were taking pictures. I'm not sure. There might potentially be pictures from the event, but I doubt it because I think if you'd taken a picture, you'd have lost your camera anyway.
yeah,
Because
for
it'd have been
sure.
fucked by the water. So yeah, we're only taking the word for it. Really, it's not like you can't exactly 100% say that it did crash into an iceberg. And I think if it didn't crash into an iceberg, then that would play more into the idea of it being switched. Did it actually be the Olympic?
Yeah, that's probably out of all the theories that have been presented opposing the narrative, the switch theory makes some sense, but at the end of the day, we don't know. You know, Gardiner has written like I think many books about the Titanic, researching it since he was a kid. So he has his opinions. I think that the Titanic overall, I think it did sink. I think overall it represents a reset financially. I think it was a reset of from the old world to the new world, like the Phoenix event and other stuff. You know, because I think there's, you got the four elements: earth, water, fire, and air. The Titanic was a water-based event where people drowned. The upcoming Phoenix event that could potentially happen, according to Archaics in 2014, could be based off the sun. So that's fire. And then, yeah, that's my opinions. Perhaps the Titanic event was just another representation of the biblical great flood that happened millennia ago.
Like the young Adrias,
Yes.
the young Adrias that happened, and archaeology refuses to acknowledge that the Titanic didn't actually happen. Sort of off topic. That was a great point, by the way. That was an absolutely fantastic point. And sort of off topic, but Joe Rogan has organised an event so that Graham Hancock and an actual archaeologist are going to argue live on the podcast, which is going to be good. I'm looking forward to that.
When is that?
I'm not sure. I bet it'll be in the next few weeks.
Ah, okay.
I just know it's happening at some point soon, and I think it'll be really exciting to watch.
Yeah, definitely.
Was there anything else that the Gardiner gentleman said about any other theories? Anything else, or was he a strong advocate of the fact that the ships were potentially swapped?
I'm gonna look further. What else did he say? He further hypothesizes that the ship that was hit by the Titanic was the one seen by the Californian firing distress rockets, which is pretty interesting because at that time was space. Did they create rockets then? I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, 30 years later, we have the bombings in World War II in Japan, so maybe. But again, I don't know where he got that from, in my opinion.
Possibly. Well, they do say that military technology is 200 years ahead of anything that we've got access to today. I don't know
Oh,
how
yeah.
true that is, but
for
Yeah, I
sure.
find it weird. I find it weird. This is kind of off topic, but on the note of like nuclear weapons, the N word. The N word
Uh,
we cannot say. The N word. There are two N words we can say, and one of them we should definitely not say, and that is
uh,
nuclear. Okay, we should not say that word. But Sleepy Joe Biden has been saying it a lot. But the nuclear word, it's kind of strange that we forget that one was actually used in Hiroshima about 80, 90 years ago in World War II. I just think that's kind of eerie. We're still living with this threat today, but back then it must have been absolutely terrifying for people. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
yeah. It's very interesting. It's very interesting to think that that was still a thing back then, and
yeah,
the threat of it is looming today. And it's kind of like we've not actually pushed the button and sent them off anywhere. We're just kind of like putting it on. Oh, shall we do it? Shall we do it? It's kind of like we're just playing chicken with ourselves. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
whether we should end the world or not, it's a bit of a weird thing.
yeah. It is
Um,
indeed.
so there were some things in code that we found surrounding the Titanic event. It's for me personally, it's linked to me. So the Titanic obviously happened on the 15th of April. That's my dad's birthday, and if you look at the time gap between the Titanic occurring and my dad's birthday, which is the 15th of April 1949, there is a total of, how long did we say? Let's have a look. So the total between those two dates is 13514, so 13,514 days. So if you look at the digits of pi, the digits of pi are very similar. It's actually an anagram of pi, so it will be 3.1415, which is kind of crazy. Also, it's a span of 444 months exactly, which is kind of eerie. Again, you have 444. I'd love to do some more research into like what the significance of that is. Also, between my birth date, and the Titanic incident is 31,427. So you have the 3.14 the pi there as well. So
Very interesting. Do you know exactly what that means yet, or not
I'm,
exactly?
I'm not 100. I'm not 100% sure. I just always see the links to pi, and pi does seem to play such a significant role in reality. Like I sent you that video of the monoliths in France, the megaliths in France on the
Yeah,
island, they're drawn to the designs into the granite, which were representative of pi. A lot of them were the equations of pi. It's like why is pi so significant? Why is it so? It's so I don't know. It's almost taken as this godly figure throughout history, and I think there is some truth and some honesty to that somewhere, but I'm not
yeah,
sure what exactly.
yeah. It is interesting because that documentary I sent. I'm gonna spoil it a little bit, but through the research, it is claimed that the presenters of the show they believe that the Egyptians created pi or used pi to measure the pyramids of Giza and all the other pyramids and megaliths that they built. So they believe that they discovered it before Archimedes, right, who studied in Egypt because that's where all these Greek scholars studied. And of course, he obviously went to Egypt in November, which is pretty interesting. Also, with pi in numerology, it represents what the Christians call the devil, Satan. If you look at numerology, it reads exactly to the numbers 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, which each number assigning to the letters that represent Satan. And of course, with Satan, what's interesting is that allegorically, it's equivalent to the Greek god Kronos, who's one of the Titans, and it goes back to the Titans and the Titanic again. So, like, it's just very, very crazy. And of course, biblically in the Bible, it even says itself that Satan is god of this world. So, whatever destroyed the Titanic, is the supernatural, whether it's Satan or Kronos, whatever you want to call it. It's definitely not man or J.P. Morgan, as some conspiracy theorists call it. So that's my thoughts on it and
Yeah.
on the Satan Pi connections.
Well, yeah. See, it's what I said earlier as well about like the allegories. So like these mythological stories seem to link somehow allegorically and symbolically to events that happen today. And yeah, the code just seems to pop up so frequently, and I'm just seeing a lot of pi recently. And yeah, um, there's all. This is kind of unrelated, but it's a 3.14. I had the lyric in my head. So there's a lyric that Kendrick Lamar says in one of his songs. It's a song that he released prior to Pimp a Butterfly, which came out like in 2015. But he actually said that March 14th was a special day to him, and obviously that's Pi Day. And one of the lyrics in the songs is pi equals 314. The devil's pie is big enough to justify the whole thing. And I think it seems like a lot of people are talking about Saturn, as you say, like Sid, Saturn, and obviously we like the Titans and fighting the Titans and the Titanic being destroyed. Yeah, there's a lot of allegorical meaning behind that. I think there's a lot of symbology behind that, and yeah, I think it's just kind of really fascinating that these celebrities as well seem to know a lot about what is going on. But I don't see, the thing is, more and more I'm starting to think that that's a trap in a way, and I'm not 100% sure what the trap is and if it is escapable or if it is part of the reality that we live in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And just to go back to the author of Robin Gardiner, he believes that the Titanic didn't struck an iceberg, but an IMM rescue ship that was drifting on station with its lights on. He bases this idea that the iceberg was seen as a short distance by the lookout on the Titanic because it was actually a darkened ship, and he also does not believe that an iceberg could inflict such damage to a steel vessel such as the Titanic. So,
Jet fuel doesn't
what?
melt steel beams.
Yeah, I mean,
That's the exact same thing that is the 9/11 of
yeah,
1912.
yeah. The question is, why would a ship crash into another ship? In my opinion,
I'm not sure. I think yeah. I don't really know what he's basing that off. That's a bit difficult to, because surely if that was the case, when was this book written?
I think it was 98. I think actually, yeah, Titanic, the ship that
98.
never sank. Yes,
And we've only recently just discovered the fact that the remains are still under there. I mean, to be fair, if you had a look around, you might be able to find some wreckage to the side of that, and I think that'd add more gravity to that sort of theory that it actually went into another ship. I think it'd be more plausible that it just collapsed.
yeah,
It just sunk for the fact that it sank. I don't know if it necessarily had to hit an iceberg. I think my theory. This is just a theory, guys. Don't ban me for this, but it's more that the iceberg idea was implanted as a way to make it seem like it was sort of a disaster that was kind of out of their control, rather than it just sinking because of the fact that it was partially destroyed anyway.
yeah,
Because it was actually a different ship that had already sustained a lot of damage previously.
yeah.
So
Because if you look at how big the Titanic is, if it did crush an iceberg, which is the official narrative, the iceberg would have to be incredibly huge to sink that ship, in my opinion.
exactly. Yeah, and like where the fuck if why are all these like conspiracy videos as well always like iceberg videos? It's like the iceberg goes deep. Is that something that's been implanted because the Titanic was one of the first conspiracies? Possibly.
Maybe.
Obviously, I understand that the idea of an iceberg is that it has a lot on the top and a lot at the bottom, so it goes deeper and deeper does the iceberg. But and there's a lot more under the surface that you don't realise. But at the same time, I kind of feel like that might be a sort of subtle reference to the fact that That was one of the first conspiracies. It's like the Avengers. It's like Titanic, the first conspiracy, and then
Yeah.
you have 9/11, which is another Avenger. Do you know? Do you know what I mean? So you have like Captain America, the first Avenger. You have the Titanic, the first conspiracy. That makes sense. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah. Funnily enough, you said Captain America's. That was obviously where the Titanic was heading.
Yeah, to New York,
Yeah. Like,
and that.
with the. Go on.
No, no, it's fine. You go. You had a point.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to go back to your connections with the pi and the 444, but most strictly on the 444 because in English Sumerian, the another name for the devil in Christianity, Lucifer, is that. And what's particularly interesting is that obviously the Titanic was looked to set sail to New York, and they obviously have the Statue of Liberty, which many people have seen with their research on Twitter suggests that the Statue of Liberty is indeed Lucifer.
Mm. Yeah, that is a good point. That is a good point, and it sort of ties into like the Phoenix event that you were talking about earlier, because New York was essentially like one of the first bases of the United States, and if the Phoenix events occur, it sort of stems from the creation of the United States, and that's where it'd be heading is New York.
Yeah. And I think what makes sense with the connection to your father is that obviously he was New York and you currently reside in Yorkshire. Maybe that could be what it is. It could possibly be that. I don't know if this is true or not, but it's just more speculation from me.
Possibly, possibly. I think I'd have to do more research into it. But yeah, what you said about 444 equaling Satan in, say, English Sumerian.
Yeah, English Sumerian.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. It's a weird connection. It's a weird connection to make. Obviously, there's a lot of numbers that go around. There's so many numbers, but I just feel like that number was so specific, especially with the pi number. It's always so specific that it makes you feel a bit eerie and a bit I don't know, weird. It's like, how could it be that precise?
Yeah,
It's like,
for
what is
sure.
the mathematical probability of that being the case to the day? Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And also with the Titanic, I mean, you have it being registered in Liverpool. Of course, beforehand it was constructed in Belfast, but the point I'm making is that it was registered in August. No, not August. It was registered in Liverpool, and of course, on the same day, but 77 years later, in 1989, you obviously have the Hillsborough disaster. Now, I don't necessarily know the connections between that. There probably isn't. I mean, because it just so happens that it's on the same day. And of course, the Titanic being registered in Liverpool, for me, that was quite interesting. But I don't know if there's real significance to that connection, especially the time frame being 77 years.
In the two events, yeah. It happened on the 15th. It did, didn't it?
Yeah, the
Yeah, it
15th of
happened on the
April.
same day. Happened on the same day. There was some time to 9/11 as well. I can't remember. I remember reading the thread a few years ago, or last year or something like that. We were talking about Hillsborough and how it tied into 9/11. But the only reason I say that is because obviously I was talking about 9/11 previously, and
Oh,
there was
yeah, and
like
obviously, yeah,
events that seemed to change the course of the world. And obviously the Titanic was, it was basically and not announced, but it was sort of it was displayed first in 1911, which is like 9/11.
mm,
And so there's that connection there.
yeah, possibly. And just the fact that Hillsborough itself is in Yorkshire and the Titanic heading to New York. I mean, it's just small pieces, but I don't really have an overall conclusion or theory based on why these two events recollect or occurred on the same day. It's just Only the supernatural can tell me why that happened.
Yeah, I think we'll have to do some more research onto the 15th of April and the significance of that day because it seems to pop up a few times,
Yeah, yeah,
and that's a bit strange.
like, mm,
Yeah, like I do genuinely think
right.
like these disasters, perhaps, I don't think they're rigged necessarily. I think to a degree they're rigged for human purposes, but I think they're already pre-scripted.
Yeah, like, even in the tarot, right? The 15th card is the devil, and as we go back to Satan and Lucifer and Kronos, I mean, it's just crazy. I don't know what to make of it. Something about that day in particular.
Yeah, and then it occurs in the star sign of Aries as well, which is the goat with the horns, which is seemingly Baphomet,
Ah, yeah,
the ram with
the
horns.
ram. Mm.
With the horns, yeah. No, so it is interesting. It is interesting. I do think a lot of these things are predestined to some degree. And yeah, I think like the code and stuff just goes to show the fact that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than man can actually predict and actually. Obviously, I don't think people are scripted Hillsborough. I think that just happened. Well, I think it to a degree it might have happened due to man, but I think the puppet strings are being pulled by something governing this realm beyond our reality and beyond our existence.
Yeah, I agree with that
Damn.
because there's no way human beings are planning that. Impossible. Impossible. And it's also disrespectful as well to the people that lost their lives to even suggest that this was all planned by some guy. No chance.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right then. I
So,
don't think I've
do you
got
have
anything
any?
more to add of you.
Nah, not really. I think it's been a very
No.
good episode.
I think people should obviously make their own minds up as to what happened at the Titanic. Obviously, we've talked about some kind of superficial conspiracies, and then more about the deep esoteric sort of like meaning behind it and things like that. But yeah, um, me and Gombe are gonna chill out. And Gombe's waiting for his food. He's been waiting for a few hours now, haven't you, in the restaurant? Freaking terrible
Yes.
service. I haven't seen a single waiter pass you. I'm not gonna lie. Neither have I though. To be honest, I've got my
Yeah.
wine, but like other than that, well, everyone
Yeah.
else has got gone clearly.
It's been nearly 48 minutes. I don't know
Yeah.
what's going on with the service. So yeah, I just have to wait
Yeah,
a bit
that
longer.
is terrible. That is honestly terrible. I think everyone's just left the ship. I don't know. They said something about it might crash into an iceberg, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think we'll be all right.
Yeah, we'll be alright. Anyway, thanks for tuning into this episode. It's important to do your own research if you're interested in the Titanic and, take what we say as face value. Don't need to believe everything that's said. You can agree, you can disagree, no problem. At the end of the day, you gotta make the truth your own. And whatever happened to the Titanic will always remain a mystery. So once again, guys, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys another time. Peace.
Peace.